Hello. Thanks for tuning in to the Martens Centre webinar on bridging the East-West divide on climate change. My name is Dimitri Lilkov and I'll be moderating today's debate. If there is one topic in modern politics on which we agree to disagree, that sure is climate change. Thankfully, the level of political debate in Europe is much more mature than some other continents around the world. So the European Union remains committed to be the global leader in the transition to a more sustainable economy. But here comes the catch. European national capitals agree on the need to lower carbon emissions. We agree on the need to become carbon neutral by 2050. But we still disagree how to actually achieve these goals. How to make Europe globally competitive, keep Europe globally competitive, and also make sure that this green transition doesn't mean that certain European member states will be hit economically or lose jobs in specific sectors. So in today's event, I want to focus on two fundamental questions. Number one is how to make the European Green Deal a success even after our economies were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And secondly, and maybe even more importantly, how to make sure that Europe continues with its ambitious environmental agenda, but without opening up additional divides between the East and the West, between the old member states and the new member states in pursuit of these ambitious green goals. And I'm extremely happy that in today's discussion, we're joined by two professionals who are in the best position to help us deal with this complex topic. Firstly, I would like to welcome Ms. Esther de Lange. She's a member of the European Parliament since 2007, and she's also vice chair of the group of the European People's Party in the Parliament. Esther has been closely involved in the drafting of the European Green Deal on behalf of the EPP. Esther, goedendag.
Hello, great to see all of you.
We are also joined by Mr. Rafał Trzaskowski, who's the current mayor of Warsaw. He has served as member of the European Parliament and also acted as Poland's Minister for Administration and Digitization. In 2020, Rafał was the Civic Platform candidate for President of Poland. Mr. Trzaskowski, dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Good morning to everyone. Hi, Esther. Goedendag.
Esther, let me kick off the debate with you. In the European Parliament, you've been very vocal that the European People's Party should provide a third way between the different political actors when we talk about climate change. A third way that tackles climate change, but also which takes people along. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, sure, I can. And let me underline that, of course, stewardship, wanting to leave this planet in a good way for the next generations, I think is really intrinsically enshrined, especially in us Christian Democrats. So let me start on that. And I come from a country where 70% of the gross national product is earned in areas that are below sea level. So the port of Rotterdam, the airport of Schiphol, all the companies in between, they already lie below sea level. So a rising sea level in a country like the Netherlands would be, not an option. Let's put it that way. So this is why we need to fight climate change. But what I meant with this third way is that I see that in the debate, there are basically three groups. You have this group of people who kind of point their finger and say, you shall do this, you shall do that. We will do targets top down. How you realize them, we don't care, but it's pointing the finger, like a teacher, do this, do that. Then you have a group of people, and I don't know if I can make this gesture in an EPP public setting, but they show their middle finger, let me describe it like that, to the next generation, because they deny the fact that there's a problem. And that's also not the right way. So there we come as an EPP, we're pretty much in the middle. We want to be the outstretched hand. We want to tackle climate change. We want to be ambitious, but we also know that countries are starting from different starting points. One size fits all doesn't work. And most importantly, you have to take people, companies, countries along. You have to be that outstretched hand by not only setting targets, but also giving people the instruments to actually achieve the targets. We are critical of some of the proposals or some of the behavior of other political groups there. We can discuss that later, but let us be that third way, that outstretched hand.
Thanks for this. How about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? Do you think that national capitals are still as ambitious as they were a year ago when it comes to these reforms, given the hit on our economies?
Was that still to me?
Yes,
Then
yes.
I will. Then I will answer. Well, that depends on how you see the impact of the COVID crisis. Is this a temporary economic setback, or is this a reason for us to also think about the fundamentals of our economic policy and question whether, economic policy and sustainability shouldn't go more hand in hand? I think the latter is the case, but I can see that if your budget is stretched because of the COVID crisis, it is very hard to make the investments needed to achieve the targets of the European Green Deal. And this is why we need to figure out ways to either help, so that's the subsidy part of helping countries, helping companies. But what is for me important as well is that we have a Green Deal with a business case so that people actually see the added value of investing in green. And from my point of view, that means that, for example, our public procurement policy needs to be changed. Our policy vis-à-vis China needs to be changed. If the Green Deal means that we will only buy electrical buses for public transport from China, it won't work. If we protect our industry by giving them a level playing field so that Germans or Poles or Dutch or Belgian workers are building these electrical buses, then it will work.
No, you raise great points, which we'll be surely touching upon in our discussion, especially when it comes to the global aspects of the European Green Deal. Mayor Trzaskowski, do you share Ms. de Lange's optimism when you talk about the European Green Deal? What's the view from Warsaw, Poland?
Well, I personally share the optimism. Now, the question is whether we are in such an optimistic situation in Poland. First of all, I don't think that there's really, the debates should be had between differences from our part of Europe and Western part of Europe. I think that thinking along these lines is completely obsolete, because populism, we are under attack with populism almost everywhere. And unfortunately, when it comes to certain governments, even governments from Central and Eastern Europe support Green Deal. There's only one, which is difficult, and obviously this is the government of Poland, the conservative government of Poland. Now, let me start with the fact that we need to actually tackle all of the challenges at the same time. And I'm very glad that the European Union does that. In the European Commission, the European Parliament, I'm the rapporteur on the Committee of the Regions of the Green Deal, and I also am of the same opinion. So we need to do recovery and fight COVID, but at the same time, do not lose Green Deal from our sight, because we need to actually engage in promoting our priorities and realizing our goals simultaneously. And this is really important, and that's what is on the table, fortunately. Now, there is a certain disjunct, because unfortunately our government, the conservative government, peace government, is not very keen on fulfilling Green Deal priorities, whereas most of the opposition and obviously the mayors of the biggest cities, who are either independent or represent opposition, they want to do just that, because we know that there's no other way. I mean, first of all, because we need to save the planet. Secondly, because if we fight for quality of life in our cities, we need to fight for clean air and at the same time fight climate change. And that's why we, for example, should do as much as we can when it comes to saving energy, taking the diesel-powered buses off the streets of our cities, investing in retrofitting, and so on and so forth. What is the real problem? The real problem is, and Esther, actually addressed it as always, point on, and that's what the position of the EPP is, that we cannot lose the people. And now the situation of Poland was difficult, especially a few years back, because we are very much dependent on coal, and we simply cannot lose so many jobs. Of course, there were also worries about price of coal. because we're so much dependent on it that changing from day to day to new energies would also be very difficult financially, because green energy 10 years ago, 5 years ago, was much more expensive. Now, the situation changed completely. And, I was also Minister of European Affairs, and I negotiated climate change in 2014. And then our government, Civic Platform government, agreed for ambitious goals for 2030. It was 40% then. Now we know that we need to be more ambitious than that. And what we agreed on was also, all kinds of compensation mechanisms, which would allow us to transform our energy mix towards a much more flexible and much more green energy mix, and also save jobs. That's what we did. Unfortunately, the current government didn't do anything in the past 5 years in order to really transform the sector. And the situation changed completely, because now, just in a few years' time, the energy from Polish coal is one of the most expensive in the world, because it's 1,000 meters underground, and green energy becomes much, much cheaper. There are possibilities with the money that the European Union earmarked for Green Deal to actually invest in new jobs and to actually invest in transformation. And thirdly, and most importantly, if you do not invest in those possibilities, you're not going to be innovative at all. And of course, the world is changing in times of COVID. We reassess almost everything, and we need to reassess that as well. And that's what I tell all the conservatives in Poland. Even if you do not believe in climate change, because some of them believe it or not, but some of them do not believe in climate change. Even if you are worried about jobs, invest, and invest, because at the end of the day, the decisions will be taken, and we will simply be on the margins economically, and we need to invest in innovativeness. So at the end of the day, there is no other way but to do that, and that's what we prepare ourselves in the cities to do. And I will tell you later on how we plan to do it, because we are the biggest emitters, but we very much differently from the conservative government, we are the responsible ones.
Exactly, you are the responsible ones. This is a very interesting point, because when we follow the negotiations around international agreements on climate change, even in the European Union, there's always this top-down approach. But people forget that the actual reforms, the actual money invested on the ground is handled by local and regional authorities. So a quick follow-up from a mayor's perspective. Which reforms or which types of actions would you like to see happening on the ground in other countries as well, prompted and initiated by national capitals or local regions? What's the best case?
For me, the most important thing is that obviously you're not going to do it without the regions and without the cities. So, of course, a lot will depend on how the Polish National Recovery Plan is being prepared, and it's prepared in a rather obscure manner. What I'm really worried about is that the government will use political criteria in order to actually to distribute money. And with roads, it is easier because roads are needed almost everywhere. But if you really want to do a green transformation and do it without the cities, and that's what PiS government is trying to do, because they do not want to invest any money in the cities because they use political criteria, you're not going to fight climate change. That's why we have our own ideas to include regional and local authorities more into the decision-making process, and especially when it comes to its implementation. And that's why we also proposed, in my opinion, and as a committee of the regions, and as also an alliance of cities, solutions whereby more and more green money could be actually distributed directly to the cities and to the regional authorities. And we propose that the European Union comes up with European programs that then they're directly addressed and directly executed by the cities. For example, one program to take off diesel buses from the streets of European cities, or retrofitting of the most important buildings. And then we see a real effect, because people hear about those reduction targets and so on, but we need to translate into something concrete. And we get out of this situation in which we need the government always as an intermediary, because we can do it ourselves. And I think that could resolve some of our problems. So this is one of the solutions that we propose. I'll be happy to elucidate more once we continue with the discussion.
I really like this, translating the overall goals into actual actions and work on the ground. This is fundamentally important for the Green Deal. Esther, I would like to bring a debate on, even you mentioned this in your opening remarks, about the emission targets on the European level. Recently, there was a vote in the European Parliament saying that we should be even more ambitious when it comes to our CO2 reduction targets by 2030, going up to 60%. And this is something which the EPP group in the Parliament didn't agree on. Do you think that becoming over-ambitious on these targets can be counterproductive?
Well, my point was really that the discussion should not be about targets only, because then you get into some kind of a match, you know, a game. I say 50, then you say 55, and then somebody says 60, 65. I think 55, the Commission proposal, and not only I think so, but even Commissioner Frans Timmermans, who's not an EPP man, has told his own socialist members of the European Parliament that 55% reduction in 2030 is extremely ambitious, but under the right conditions feasible. He is worried that if we now set 60%, you're going to A, create disappointment because you won't manage or you may not manage to get there. But B, as Raphael said, one of the key things for the EPP is to take people along. And the assessment of the European Commission, for example, shows that with the plans of the European Commission, an average family is of course going to save on the energy bill, which is great. But they will also be spending, on average, 3 times the amount that they save on the investment needed, for example, to make their house, more climate-proof. So this is my exact point. We have to make sure that we do it in such a way that people are actually enabled to come along. And then 55 is a huge step. Ursula von der Leyen called the Green Deal putting a man on the moon. In 2050, we want to be climate neutral. 55% reduction in 2030 is then a high ambition, but realistic. What my biggest criticism is to a number of other political parties is that they say, yes, we're going to put a man on the moon, but to build the rocket, they only give us, a hammer and some wood. That's not going to create a rocket. They will say, yes, we need these high ambitions, but we don't want any nuclear power in Europe. We want hydrogen, but we want it to be immediately green or blue. A lot of people know that you have to start investing when the hydrogen is still gray. And it will then, once the infrastructure is there, become greener and blue. So this is the criticism that I have. So let's focus, now that we've set the target, or the Commission has set the target on 55%, let's see what comes out of the negotiations finally, but I expect it to be around 55. Let's then not talk about the target anymore, but about the how we are going to do it.
Exactly. If you have to listen to all of these demands coming from different parties on the implementation, all the requests, when you add them up, the equation just doesn't come out. And I think it's good to remind our audience that now it's by 2020, we barely made it. We barely reached our EU level goal of reducing CO2 emissions by 20% compared to 1990, which was maybe the easiest part of the task. The next decade, going to 55 will be extremely, extremely difficult. So we should be wary about green populism when we follow this topic. Mayor Trzaskowski, let's talk about the design of the Green Deal and your perspective. There's been lots of pessimism coming from different domains that the different mechanisms of the Green Deal or the instruments provided by the Commission will not be enough so they can encourage national reforms and painful economic reforms in many member states, especially in Central and Eastern Europe or in the Baltics. Let's say the Just Transition Fund, the specific money which is to be allocated to specific countries, people say that this money won't be enough so that, let's say, Bulgaria or Poland is convinced to reform their economies. Do you see any problems with the design of the Green Deal? What's your comment on that?
Well, first of all, let me react to what Esther said, because I think she as always, hit the nail. One of my experiences that, I was a member of the European Parliament, I was Minister of digitization, then Minister of European Affairs, member of the Polish Parliament, and you always talk about targets, and yeah, we quarrel 55%, 60%, and so on and so forth. And you have a day to decide or two, and then obviously you are in a competition because the Greens and all the progressive parties are more ambitious, and then people ask you, why do you not vote for 60%, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, when you are the mayor of a city, I want to know what it means. And I don't, because, to be absolutely honest, and I've asked quite a lot of friends in other cities, I'm a member of the C40 and so on and so forth. And in many cities, people really do not know what are the real implications. So, for example, if I want to hit the target of 55% in Warsaw or 60%, what would be the difference? How many diesel-powered buses do I have to get rid of? How many houses do I have to retrofit? How much greenery do I need? And so on and so forth. And then, only then, you can actually talk to the people and tell them, just as Esther has said, listen, fine, we can do 60% or we can do even 70%, but that would mean that I would have to actually put all of my money into green investments, which means that, for example, less roads, less money in education, less money, and then we concentrate only on green. And at the beginning, let's not kid ourselves, you would spend much more, just as Esther said, you would have to invest. For example, we are giving certain money as a city to people who switch into renewables, but of course we cannot finance it 100%. So at the end of the day, in order to have a real conversation, you need to, go down, be on the ground and actually discuss the real consequences, because now people are excited. Yes, let's do 60%, but then either you are lying or you have to simply, know what you're doing and give the bill to the people. So this is really important. And that's why also I come back to, you asked me about the Just Transition Fund. Yes, of course, that's the baby of Jerzy Buzek, a good friend of mine. And it's wonderful that it's there and it's needed. And of course, this is one of the tools that is going to help transform the energy sector in those regions which really are dependent on it. But we all know that it's not going to be enough. And that the money, which is actually allocated to Just Transition Fund is just a very small percentage of what is really needed. Now, what we need, of course, is all the other instruments which now are being negotiated. We need leverage. We need money from the private sector in order to really invest in all of those opportunities. And we need to also a change of mentality, so that you can explain to the people that, for example, the way in which cities invest money have to change. And sometimes it's going to be painful, because it's all well to talk about wonderful, ambitious targets, but then you have to translate them into reality. And that's why I come back, you ask me, what else can we do? That's why I think that if we really want to win this argument and really want to be professional about it and not just quarrel 55, 60%, where I can guarantee that 90% of the people who vote have no idea what it really means, what it implicates, what are the implications for their countries, for the regions, for the cities. And if let's check. We could ask them questions. Tell me, where are you from? Okay, so you're from, say, Paris. Tell me, what is the difference if you say 55% or 60%? What would be the additional investments you would have to do in order to reach a more ambitious target? I guarantee that most of those guys will not respond to that question. That's why I think that what we need to do, we need to make this debate much clearer and more concrete, not targets. Of course, targets need to be there because those are our goals, but to prove that we are really serious. And as I told you, the idea of the cities is to actually do very concrete European programs. And also, I think that, first of all, we would educate ourselves and we would see the results clearly. And I've talked to Timmermans and others on numerous occasions, and I think that this idea is progressively being bought by the Commission and some of the member states, that actually we can invest in those pan-European programs and then really show the difference. Because imagine that the Commission says 7 years, no diesel-powered buses on the streets of European cities. Can you imagine the effect that really in the 7 years, all of those buses would disappear? Is it going to resolve the problem? Of course not, but it's going to help us. And it's going to demonstrate, we could demonstrate that, for example, that brings us 2 or 3% closer to the target in our cities. And then we could demonstrate that, other things need much more investment and much more difficult investment, because it is, if you have money, it is relatively easy to throw away, the diesel-powered buses from your streets. But to retrofit all the buildings, that's much more difficult. And just finishing up, I'm going to give you one example. What we do in Warsaw, we take away the coal-powered furnaces from our houses. You know, there are not that many, but there are some districts of Warsaw which still depend on that. So from all the city-owned properties and so on, we pay money to take them away, all the furnaces. But when you install a heat pump or a renewable, for it to be really cheap and for it to be really affordable, you need to retrofit the whole building. Okay, so, and for example, you know, there is a district of Warsaw where we have those wooden houses which are like architectural monuments, because it used to be like a spa and now it's a part of Warsaw district. So it's a beautiful, you know, wooden houses, right? The whole district is full of them. I mean, to retrofit these buildings cost a fortune, right? So, okay, there is a heat pump, but it's not effective. You know what I'm saying? So you need to show to the people that investment needed for that is huge in order, and we cannot afford it. So, okay, the union comes with retrofitting money. So you have to show that, you know, these things are connected and that these things are expensive and that there are things that we can do on our own, but then for them to be really effective, you need to put other, you know, elements into place. And this is, in my view, this is the debate we should be having now. How to make all of those big debates very concrete, and how to also make it possible for us, the policymakers, to make responsible decisions, okay? Because for me, it's easy to say 60%, 70%, 80%. At the end of the day, I want to know what it really implicates. And we are doing that research in Warsaw. Some cities have done that research, but I can assure you that most of the people who now take those decisions do not really know the real consequences financially, socially, and so on for their own neighborhood.
I see a very interesting trend from both of your statements. It's about the overall communication and about the overall goals of the Green Deal and how to actually make it more understandable and more comprehensible for people. So a question for both of you. Let's not make this into a one-way traffic. The next couple of minutes, maybe all the questions I'll be giving, feel free to jump in. We'll be also involving Q&A from the audience. But my question to both of you is the following. How can the EPP, the European People's Party, improve its communication on this topic and involve new voters and people who care about the environment, people who share these concerns? But these are also people who are economically more conservative, let's say, people who are not favoring green policies. I think there is a wide spectrum of people and potential electorates who would listen to your messages and would subscribe to them, but they're not voting for the EPP. How to better communicate this topic, how to address this type of electorate?
I think Raphael already gave part of the answer to that question, because I think beside those who deny climate change, you know, most of the audience in Europe, let's put it that way, they know why we are doing this. They know why. It's the future of our children. The problem is that a lot of political parties are talking about what, so about the target, general principles, etc., but not about the how. And the group of the EPP in the European Parliament has said, we want to be the group of how. And there we rely, of course, on our specialist colleagues, you know, who know the exact programs, but also people like Raphael, because I'm very happy that he gave the example of the city heating and retrofitting the houses. And by the way, Jerzy Buzek is, of course, an excellent politician because he has more baby than just one. It's not just the Just Transition Fund, but some of the money coming for, you know, some of the money used for improving the city heating in Poland is coming from the modernization fund in the ETS system. I will spare you the details, but Jerzy fought very, very hard, and quite rightly so, you know, to have these concrete things, even in difficult pieces of legislation. So once you start communicating the how, and there Raphael's example really shows that this is not an East-West thing. I come from a member state where we closed the coal mines in the 1960s. And I know, because my granddad was a coal miner, and I saw what it did to the region and how incredibly hard the transition was. And we managed that transition. There's now chemical industry in that area, chemical industry that is the cleanest in Europe. But if we don't get the ETS reform right, they will disappear. So we have to be careful in everything that we do. But at the same time now, the Netherlands has decided to also stop using our natural gas. So we stopped coal in the 1960s. We're currently also stopping gas, whereas in a lot of countries, gas is a solution to the problem. That shows the differences in member states, but it shows that people are worried about the same thing. I live in a house from the 1920s. It has one wall of brick. That's the kind of wall you can't insulate. If you tell people with these houses to put a heat pump, first of all, it costs 10,000 euros. They can't afford it. Secondly, their house will be cold in winter because it cannot be insulated to the standard that you need. And we need politicians also at a European level who can make that argument and give solutions to that problem, because otherwise we will lose the people. And I think that is most important in the communication. Don't blah, blah about abstract things, but show that you know what goes on and provide solutions for challenges that people really face on a day-to-day basis.
I think that, of course, today we have populism everywhere, and it's not only conservative populism from the right, which is obviously there, and in Poland is the most dangerous one, or simply disregarding certain problems. I've talked to the president of my country, and he said that he's not that convinced about men's real influence on climate change because his father is a professor of chemistry and he doesn't really believe in it. That's the level of the debate that we are sometimes having. But also from the left. And when they say, for example, when we try to be responsible and we say 55, 60%, they want more ambitious targets. And when you really ask them about what it means, they don't know. I mean, so obviously the question is to make this debate more informative. And that, this is the thing that we are famous for, the EPP, for being more rational and for being more informed. So let's use that to our advantage and simply start having this debate. It's not that when we say 55 or 60, not 70 or 80, that we're less ambitious, but simply that we're realistic and that we know what it entails. Now, what are the most, so one thing is putting it into numbers and proving to the people, what are they really voting for and what they're really supporting, and asking them whether they are actually ready to pay such a price, because it's not obvious. And then, you can be as ambitious as you can, but then you're not going to push it through if you do not have a debate about it. Because if you start cutting investment somewhere else, you have to, and of course, we all have less and less money in the city because COVID is killing our incomes. Then you need to have this informed debate. Now, education. Always, people in Warsaw, even like my generation and older, become incredibly green in January and February, because in January and February we have a lot of smog, and then they start talking about, investment and so on because they want to have cleaner air. And of course, fighting for clean air is a bit different than fighting with climate change. But I mean, when it comes to the city, I mean, the solutions are very similar, So I mean, again, if you deal with the transportation system, because in the south of Poland, most of this comes from low emission. Most of the smog comes from powered furnaces, coal-powered furnaces in individual housing. Whereas in Warsaw, it's 50%. It's transportation. So we know how to deal with that. But of course, it entails huge sums of money. But education and leaving also some of the decisions in the hands of the people. So what we do in our city, we've done, of course, participatory budget, where people decide how the money is spent. But we went further than that. We've organized a citizens panel on retrofitting and energy saving. What does that mean? It means that we choose from among our city dwellers a representative panel of the people, like you choose a jury in the American system to adjudicate in a case. And we surround them with experts, and they will hear testimonies and so on, and they will come up with solutions that they have to vote on. And if those solutions get 80% of a vote of a representative panel, then I am obliged to actually put them in practice. And that's one of the things, to engage the people, but while engaging them, also educate them as to what all of these changes entail.
Excellent so far. Very quick to both of you, the international aspect. because there's been growing concerns that if Europe sticks to its plan, first of all, it might lose economic competitiveness globally. And second, all these reforms, all these ambitions in the Green Deal, this means that something has to change in our own internal dealings. Esther mentioned our industrial policy, let's say, or trade policy with China. People say that, okay, if we reform our energy mixes and try to be a bit more sustainable, this means we have to rely more on natural gas, let's say in Poland, meaning that we need to increase our dependence on Russia. Both of you, do you see any threats on the international level when we're trying to talk about the Green Deal in Europe?
You mentioned a lot of international aspects there in one question, but maybe let me focus on the procurement, industrial trade side of things. The key word there is level playing field. The EPP is not a group that wants to close off the European continent, and not do trade anymore. On the other hand, we see that the playing field is not always fair. When it comes to Chinese investment, foreign investment, I gave the example of the buses. European companies are not allowed into a tendering process if they get state aid. Chinese companies, it would be quite a big exception if they didn't get state aid. How fair is that? So I think there we need to change the European rules as they stand at the moment to make sure that we provide for our producers at least a level playing field, and then may the best win. And let's hope, and I'm convinced that it can be the European ones. And that is linked to the discussion about, is the Green Deal a threat? No, in the end, we all need to become even more green and even more sustainable than we are at the moment. And in this global game, the ones who are most innovative, also in the field of sustainability and green, they will have an advantage. So we better invest in that kind of innovation in Europe. But let's make, the global game, let's make that fair. And then still some work is to be done.
I asked my friends when we engaged in this Bloomberg Harvard program about cities, and so what are the most important lessons to be learned? And we've talked with the mayors of the biggest American cities and with the real experts and so on. And, their only answer is this: data, 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 data. Just base all of your decisions on data. And I think that this is a problem that we have, because at the end of the day, we've talked about how much it costs in a city, but then if we are to take informed decisions, we also need to have different scenarios and different scenarios of trade policy as well, and simply demonstrate to the people that there are costs of having an ambitious policy, and that if we're going to go overboard with some of the targets, then it will just simply cost us money. And in relations with other countries as well, it will be more difficult to conduct trade negotiations and so on and so forth. And most of these things can be shown on numbers, but we are not doing it from some, because of some reason. And of course, the situation changes. Thanks God, Joe Biden won the elections in the United States. So of course there will be a pivot of American policy back to fighting climate change. The Chinese are changing their position as well, but of course that will be with a lot of investment from the state. So at the end of the day, there is no other alternative. We still need to stick to our plan, but I think it would be worthwhile to show the data and to discuss the consequences, that it can at the beginning slow down our competitiveness. Then it would skyrocket, but at the beginning it's going to be tough. That it can cost us some jobs and so on and so forth. Just as we have to explain at the end of the day, do you want cheap food, right? And people would say, yeah, sure, we want cheap food. Really? I mean, do you want American type of chicken, or do you prefer French type of chicken, and 238 varieties of cheese? At the end of the day, you have to explain to the people that, yes, some things maybe will be more expensive, but the benefits are incredible. But you have to make people aware. And this is the problem that I think that largely this part of the discussion is missing, that we need to explain that it's not going to be an easy ride at the beginning, and that there are certain costs which those ambitious decisions entail, and we have to show them, because otherwise we will embark upon a way, and then we will start losing support, because people will see how much it costs them. And also, we need to show why we are putting more money into some of those priorities, which means that obviously we will have less money to other priorities, okay? And we have to show that if we want to be competitive, that that's the only way forward. And we also have to explain to everyone that it's not enough when you're young. It's not enough to protest and say that all the establishment is bad because they are not ambitious enough, but that it also translates, for example, to your choices while picking up a new job. That you have to think that, you know, you have to, while deciding what do you want to do in the future, that maybe it's better to do something with the solar panels than with the traditional economy. I mean, all of that has immense, incredible consequences. And we need to start talking about these so that people can have a balanced view of what we do. And that actually brings us back to one of your first questions. And then we can prove that we, as the EPP, as the mayors, as the responsible people, that sometimes we are treading more carefully, but we are doing it because we are responsible and we are pragmatic, not because we lack ambition.
Essentially convincing the people that these reforms are needed, even though they might be painful. Like a classic job of the center right and the EPP. I just want to quickly jump to Q&A from our live Facebook feed. There's been many questions, especially going in the direction of local engagement, rural communities. I mean, Mayor Rafał, you already touched upon these, but open question to both of you quickly. To what extent are we able to stick to city-EU cooperation on the Green Deal in order to oppose populism happening on the governmental level? The understanding of the principle of subsidiarity may be crucial at this point.
That was Rafał's point, right? Make the link between Brussels, so to say, and the local level. We're already trying to do that in a way, for example, when it comes to the next generation EU, the Resilience and Recovery and Resilience Facility. So that's the big budget coming from the Corona support to member states. We're channeling a substantial part of that to green measures, but measures that actually make sense at the local level, in our view. And therefore, the EPP group is fighting very, very hard to not make this money a blank check to member states, to just do whatever they want. So therefore, we set the targets to channel part of that money to green measures, but also we want the European Commission to okay the ideas that member states have. And if they're not up to standards, if they're not green enough, or if they're not making the economy more resilient, but just spending money for the sake of spending money, that will not benefit society in the long run, then we believe, and we have strengthened that part of the proposals, we believe really that the European Commission should be able to intervene and also withhold the money if a member state is really not living up to the expectations. That's not the direct link yet that Rafał would like to see, but it's a step in absolutely the right direction. We cannot, and even when we had Trump in the White House, I agree with Rafał, now it will be easier to cooperate with the United States, thank God, in the field of climate. But in the past 4 years, it was the cities and the states in America that kept the green agenda going. I would be perfectly happy in such a situation for the EU not to deal with Washington, but to deal with California. So often you see that in these kinds of situations, and also within the debate about climate change, you get into a situation where the local level or regional level and the EU level are more of an ally than some capitals that are in between. And we should just not blindly accept the fact that everything should be, the free will of the capital if the capital is going in the wrong direction. There should be checks and balances in the system to make sure that the common sense that I hear from the local level prevails.
Rafał, keeping the government in check from the local level.
Well, I mean, first of all, we are cooperating, and we are cooperating in many different areas as cities and as regional authorities. As I told you, I'm the rapporteur on climate pact within the Committee of the Regions, where we have our own network, and obviously we try to be in a dialogue with all the other European institutions. I'm also treasurer of the Eurocities, where we as European cities are trying to influence the agenda and where we really, put our heads together and also our influence to bear. We've signed a pact of free cities with Budapest, Bratislava, and Prague, where we wrote a letter to the President of the European Commission to come up with certain proposals for direct financing. And it was signed by quite a lot of other cities in Europe. For example, Rotterdam, when we mentioned Rotterdam. And also, Warsaw is the only city from my region which is part of the C40, which is, the city of the coalition of cities worldwide which fight climate change. By the way, now led by my good friend Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, where, of course, California is at the forefront fighting climate change. So we are pretty well organized, and we are trying to, put that influence to bear. But the important thing is to accept the right solutions within European legislation. And that's why we cooperate with all the institutions. And that's why thank you very much for all that the European Parliament does. Because on the one hand, we need to fight for very ambitious goals. And I told you, I think that, of course, 90%, 95% of the money will still go through national envelopes. But I think that having those pan-European programs directly financing things on the ground is a very good idea. By the way, let me open a parenthesis. It also allows me to get out of very schizophrenic situation. Because on the one hand, I want the European Union to be tough on values. I really do. And linking money with rule of law is very important. But on the other hand, as a mayor of the city of Warsaw, it is difficult for me not to talk about it because at the end of the day, crazy government, and then we are penalized, the regional authorities and the people of Warsaw. So I think that direct financing could allow us also to get out of that schizophrenic situation in which, okay, the government, let them take responsibility for what they do, but we should not be penalized. But and that's why I think that the solution also sort of, we fry a few fish on the same fire. But anyhow, then there is also the thing that Esther talked about, that we need to make certain that the money which is then allocated to member states is spent in the right way, so that it's spent most effectively, that it's not spent according to political criteria. I mean, that's exactly what is being done now with structure funds. Most of them are now spent according to political criteria, where people vote for peace, they get it. Local governments which are in the opposition, the government does everything to make it more difficult. So we also should make absolutely certain that the European Commission, the European Parliament have powers of scrutiny over how this money is being allocated, but then how it is spent, so that it's spent according to the principles and norms that we all establish together within the European institutions.
Fantastic. On this great note, I'd like to wrap up the debate. We're going just a bit over time, but I think we had a very, very interesting exchange. I really there's been so many points mentioned. Maybe I'll just wrap up with a couple of key takeaways from this debate. The EPP and the EU needs to make sure that we translate these environmental goals as actual policies, actual actions which are understandable for the people on the ground. We shouldn't surrender to green populism and the never-ending climate target betting. Mayor Trzaskowski reminded us how important it is to make sure we involve local and regional authorities in the heavy pushing, in the heavy lifting, so there can be progress from the bottom up. And in the end of the debate, essentially, we were reminded that on the European level, we need to make sure that we're tough on values, we're tough on rules, and make sure that the money from the Green Deal and from the Recovery Fund goes in the right places. This is taxpayers' money after all. Esther, Rafael, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. Thank you to our viewers, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you very much. Dank u wel. Tot ziens.
Thank you.